you should get like a notice or something.
Excellent. Well, hello guys, and welcome to this segment of His Bi-Identity. Obviously, you know, I've run so many platforms that this is going to be shared in many different platforms. So depending on where you're viewing this from, welcome to this conversation, whether it's Open Door or His Bi-Identity. I'm Jan, obviously you know who I am, and I am with my co-host today, if I can call you this, Dane. So Dane, do you want to just say a quick few words about yourself, and then we'll tell you what we're here for today.
All right, yeah. So I'm Dane, I'm a poet. I go by Brother Basil for my poetry, and I'm an artist, and I'm a proud out bi man. I'm really glad to be here. I also am a queer theologian, or becoming one, and a father. So I'm really excited to be talking with you today and to explore this whole topic. And I'll be honest, I'm like a little nervous, but it's just because this conversation doesn't happen that often.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's very, very exciting. Well, just know that I'm glad that you're here, because obviously this is my first time having that kind of conversation as well. Mm-hmm. You know, we've spoken a few times before this. You know, it's been amazing to, you know, find people online, you know, from the bi community, because it's something that I didn't know existed. So guys, if you didn't know what we were going to talk to you about, I mean, it should be written underneath. We're going to be talking about the bi experience, you know, and, you know, this is such an amazing thing, because I see it as revolutionary that we're able to be here, two bi men from different parts of different communities, different sides of the world even. You know, I'm in the UK, then you're in...
I'm in Washington State in the US.
Right, okay. So it's we're international at this point, and it's amazing that we can have this conversation. So the first thing that I want us to talk about, the first point, something positive, because you know what, when we talk about LGBTQ issues and things like that, it's always a negative. Like, you know, always, oh, you know, we're not treated that way, we're not seen, we're misunderstood. I don't want to talk about that just yet. We can come to that in a bit. But what is the best part about being bi? And I wanted to throw this out there.
Yeah, well, so I would start with this, is that I don't feel capable of talking on behalf of the whole bi community. I feel like as a cis bi man, right? Like I can speak a little bit to that experience. And I think one of the best parts about being bi is it's just feeling freedom of expression and freedom of movement, and the ability to be really fluid and open to whatever is true for me in terms of how I experience my sexuality or my gender or myself. Like, I feel like I was in a little box before, and then in terms of like coming out and embracing this bi identity, embracing my own queer identity, I've been able to like really just experience a lot more pleasure and joy and excitement. Yeah, it's been liberative. What about you, Jan?
Oh, I think there's a few things that you said there that resonated with me. It was freedom of movement. Mm. And that's something that we don't often speak about. And what that means to me is the fact that your whole aura just changes. Different things that were blocked in your auric field become loosened. And so therefore you become looser. And I don't mean loose in a sexual sense. I just mean loose in just in the movement. Yeah, that's it. In the way that you move, you know, the energy gets, you know, the energy gets released. And that's a very, very important part of this. I talk about body, I talk about movement. I used to be a dancer. Those, to me, these things are very important. And so just like you, being bi is that for me, that liberation. I use the term liberation all the time. And people are like, well, what does it mean? To me, liberation is authenticity. It's emotional, it's psychological, it's physical freedom from that box that you were talking about, that masculinity box that we inherited. Yeah. Because As much as we like we don't like to admit it, that masculinity is something that is has been very prescriptive,
Mhm.
and some of us step away from that. Some of us step away from that, not necessarily because of our orientation, but because of the fact that we're embracing our authenticity. And that to me is one of these things. Everything that I talk about is to do with energy. And that bi energy, boy, that is everything. Okay. It's everything. I'm sure you can agree with that. Every bi guy that I've spoken to, the energy is like, yeah, we're the dudiest of dudes, So that's the part that I love about this, just the authenticity and just, yeah, just the fluidity of energy, as you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah. Can I tell you a quick story? So after I came out, I went out dancing with one of my best friends in Spokane, and she's known me for like, I don't know, 15 years. And we got to the end of the night, and she came up to me and she said, Dane, you move differently now. Like, you are literally more loose in your body. Like, you're literally moving your body differently than you were before. You feel more open, but you actually look more open as well. And that was really affirming for me. I was like, that is a direct reflection of how I feel internally. So I don't know, when you're talking about dancing, being a dancer, I was like, yeah, coming out, being bi and coming out has actually affected my dancing.
No, absolutely, because I think before, because I think what we share is that we came from we're straight. Before, I don't know if I can say this like that, straight passing, right? So
Yeah.
for many years I have been in Swagview, and it's been recent that I've claimed my identity out loud. I had come out 12 years ago, but it was in private, in a small circle. But officially, it was last year that I claimed my identity, and obviously, what that did was, like you said, like it just freed everything, And I think because we were in that straight box before, you have to, the way that I do straight is kind of like this, just kind of like, and I use the term constipated. People often laugh at me about that. No offense to the straight viewers, but, there's this thing, that as a straight guy, you just have to be like this, but when you embrace yourself, it just kind of, everything just loose. Everything just, you just get that groove.
Yeah.
And to me, that's absolutely amazing. That's what your story is kind of like highlighting.
Yeah. 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 I think constipated is a good word. And it's not to say that all straight men look that way, because they don't. But I think when that's not organic to you and you're trying to be more rigid than you are, right? Like you're kind of talking about, I'm like, yeah, you do. You look a little bit constipated. Or
Yeah.
I feel that deeply. I feel that deeply. So
Yeah. That's brilliant. So I think linked to that, the next point was, best part about coming out. And I think we kind of touched on that, but going deeper, what was the best part for you?
I think just genuinely being able to be vulnerable with people for the first time in my life about things that had happened to me, um, traumas that I had experienced. Just a lot. There was a lot of stuff that was hidden that I just didn't want to talk about because it would potentially expose me, right? Like,
Right.
and I lived in low-level anxiety of being discovered. Even before I was really aware of what I was worried about being discovered about, I always felt like if people really knew me, they wouldn't accept, love, like, treat me with respect, right? And so
Right.
I think in coming out, being able to be honest and vulnerable with everyone in lots of people in my life who I wasn't really able to be, and with myself, and then to still be yeah, well, what I'll say is that relationships change, right? So some relationships got worse or vanished, and then other relationships got more depth, became more rich, and more real. So yeah, I would say probably
Or
the best part about coming
new
out
ones were
is
just
not.
created.
What'd you say?
Or new ones were just created.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then joining a larger community too that I wasn't a part of before. But I would say probably the number one thing, that the best part about coming out has been that my mental health has gotten so much better. I have so much less anxiety, and I feel closer to the people that I love. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, that's definitely it, the mental health part, because obviously, before I went through a really rough patch before officially, claiming myself. And for many years, that was, although I had come out 12 years before, there was this sort of burden that was on me, because I didn't feel quite like I was, like, I said, okay, well, I spoke to people that, close knit, but I didn't quite feel like anything had happened. So I kept that weight on my shoulder for many years. And so it wasn't until things came to a head last year. I went through a really dark time, lasted 6 months, like complete like breakdown. And then when I came out of that, it was quite interesting. I spoke to the therapist, and the therapist said, okay, you have two choices. Either you claim this out loud and take whatever comes with it, or if you carry on, things will just get worse. And after what I've been through for 6 months, I was just like, no, there's no questions here. And so I took the courage to just be like, you know what, let me just do what I need to do. And obviously, like you mentioned, same thing. Some relationships completely exploded. Some relationships disappeared. Some relationship got deeper. Some changed. But for me, what I really loved is that what it ushered in. What the process ushered in, what my authenticity ushered in. It ushered in the people that were for me, the people that needed to be there with me to understand what I was going through, and that were going to be by my side from then on. And that, I don't think money can buy that at all. And I absolutely love that process for that. So for mental health, for new friendships, new connections, and also the aspect of just being myself. Like, I think people take that for granted so much, that they can be themselves. Whereas people like us, we can't always be ourselves. We can't, especially coming from these straight passing kind of backgrounds or whatever, where there's cultural norms, there's family, there's religion. For me, religion has been a huge thing. Like, you can't express yourself as much. Now, I've always been a bit of a rebel, don't get me wrong, but I'm even more so now, because I have the opportunity to just kind of be my real self, and so that I'm really, really grateful for. It's a blessing.
Yeah. Huh.
So the next point that, obviously we've spoken about the positives, right? So I don't want to take it too negative or anything like that, but let's talk a little bit about biphobia. Yes, the B word, biphobia. So obviously, we've had very positive experiences of coming out, but obviously they didn't go without the negative parts, or the parts that were challenging. So when was the first time you feel like you started encountering biphobia, and at what level? Casual, a bit more pointed, directed? Like, what has been your experience about that?
I mean, are you talking about in terms of like the coming out journey, or just in life in general?
Both. Since you've openly come out.
Yeah. Um, hmm. That's a good question. I feel like it's kind of hard to place. So much of it is feels to me to be pretty subtle, generally speaking. Um, and like these little micro comments, or just like, oh, people being like, oh, you're gay now, and
Right.
which is like instant invisibilization of the whole bi identity. And I had, yeah, I would say probably the number one thing I noticed right away was a lot of like erasure of just sort of, or yeah, invisibilization of like whole parts of my uh, existence, and sort of just like wanting to just shift me over to being in sort of a gay box rather than a straight box. And um, that kind of has a two-sided thing, because I feel like part of coming out as bi is also really facing and dealing with internalized homophobia.
Of
And
course.
I even have a hard time sometimes countering the like, oh, you're gay now kind of thing, because I don't want to be like, no, I'm not, like, because then that's right. I'm like, well, yeah, exactly. I'm like, that's there's actually, I think gay men are wonderful and beautiful, and I love them, and there's a lot in common. We have a lot in common. So I'm always, it's one of those like tricky places where I'm like, how do I differentiate this identity without denigrating another identity, right? How do I even bring awareness that there is a difference here? How do I honor the difference between these identities without reacting negatively to another one? So that's kind of been, I think, in the coming out journey, that's been some consistent biphobia sort of thing that I've faced. At least I think it's called monosexism.
Yes, monosexual.
Yeah, you're either one or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely also experienced just like a general, like, gaining the respect of some people and losing the respect of others. And so losing respect from people is hard. Yeah, what about you?
I think you put it across so well. I think, for me, it was different because I'm married, I'm in a heterosexual relationship, we've been married forever, literally. And so and then this is something that we both knew, whatever, for a long time. But for me to actually put myself out like that, I became the villain automatically. Everybody looked at me and they were like, okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean that you're on the down low? Does it mean that you're cheating? Does it mean that you've got an open marriage? Blah, blah, blah. And I think that was the most difficult thing for me to navigate, because obviously I knew this was going to be an issue. And I think if I'd been single, it wouldn't have bothered me at all. Like, I would have been out a long time ago. But because of the position that I was in, I was trying to, to protect. You tend to want to protect because you know what's going to come. So I literally put my back against, and got all the arrows, to protect my family. But I think that I dealt with it honorably.
Yeah.
Because I am a fighter, and I did fight people. I wasn't going to let anybody get away with, denigrating me, or, just kind of, just kind of making me out to be a villain.
Yeah.
This is my identity.
Yeah.
And I feel like I had to fight for that. As I've mentioned, I've earned this. I've worked hard to get to this point. And at the time when I needed people to kind of be like, okay, I honor your courage, it was a different response. And yeah, that made me have to triple the power with which I was coming into this. Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of things to fight against, stereotypes, all these other things.
Yeah.
But I think, like I said, I did that very well. And to come back to what you said about, people just assuming that you're gay because they don't understand, or they don't want to understand. I think that's what it is, really. People refuse to understand. With me, it's not about denigrating one or the other. It's important to make it very clear that within this community, there's different identities.
Yeah.
And our identity is the one that's kind of in between. you know, the way that I kind of see it is like the best of both worlds, if you want, you know, and that's how I kind of put it across. But I will not have anyone misinterpreting my identity or anything like that. So I always take time to correct people. And it's not a spite against, you know, gay or straight or whatever. It has to be done and it has to be said. So I take a different stance than most people. I will educate. I will fight if I have to. So, but that's just what life has taught me. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the villainizing is really interesting, and I think just in sort of reflecting, like I actually came out. When I came out, I was married. I'm no longer married, but I was married to a woman. I had been with her for like a decade, and so it was one thing that came up was like just a lot of fear, right, and just distrust, and yeah, just like kind of like a tidal wave of fear and distrust and villainization. So I'm glad you talked about that, because I kind of
we become villains.
Yeah,
that's what it is. Because especially as men, if you're in a relationship, if you're married, and you do come out, you are a villain straight away, because everything is assumed that you're doing everything under the sun and that you're not being faithful and whatever else. And it's impossible for you to be monogamous.
Yeah,
that's what the plague of this is. And so that leads on very nicely to the next talking point, which is about hypersexualization. Okay, because they link very beautifully, because hypersexualization is the reason why we are made to be villains, because people assume that if you know you're fluid, or if you have same gender attraction, then it's absolute debauchery. You know, you're just kind of immoral. You're all about sex, and you're all about all these things, and you're constantly wanting to go and sleep with everybody. But again, that's not what it is. It's not. You know, and so my crusade has been: we can be monogamous. It is possible for us to be monogamous. Being bi is not a mental health disorder, because that's kind of what I got from people when they were saying, the first question they'd asked me was, "Well, how are you coping with it? How are you guys coping with it?" And I was like, "Well, there's nothing to cope with. It's not a disease. It's not a disease. Like I'm not sitting here like, you know, I don't know, like constantly yearning after, you know, my pin-up or my, you know, that's not what this is. It's not. It's an identity. And that's something that my message everywhere, in all my platform. We can be monogamous. This is not anything, this is not like we're not sexual bandits, you know, sexuality bandits. We are people, and this is our identity at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think I understand that focus, and that makes sense to me. And I think it's important to be said because of the kind of the hypersexualization of bi identities in general. And also I think there's this opportunity too, in terms of jumping into that whole question of sexuality, and what is it? I mean, I think in general, we live in a sexually repressed culture that's scared of those kinds of questions, that chooses to remain uneducated. As somebody who's actually taught sex education, like comprehensive sex education, in a very pro-sex and pro-relationship kind of way, I'm like, I think one thing that's beautiful about opening that box is actually kind of questioning, like, what is monogamy? What are the assumptions there? What is non-monogamy? What are the options really? Because I think in our culture at large, we're kind of handed like one script for a lot of things. And instead of realizing like, oh, there's a lot of different ways we can potentially behave, and different ways in which we could work. And it doesn't mean that one is necessarily better than the other, but just to acknowledge like there are actually other options besides the binaries that are presented to us,
That's
whether that's gay or straight or monogamous or
polyamorous.
celibate, right? Like it seems to be like you're either one. Yeah, I think polyamorous would probably be like a third category.
Yeah,
It's sort of like you're with someone or you're with one person or you're completely single forever. I think that's like the traditional sort of viewpoint. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that on that category, but it is something that I feel like I've thought more about, considered. I think it also opens up questions about gender. What does it mean to be, what is masculinity in general? All these unconscious assumptions and behaviors that in kind of opening the box of sexuality, suddenly it's like, oh, we can ask a lot of questions. We may come to the same conclusions, right? We may be like, oh no, at the end of the day, monogamy is really the right thing for me, which is what I'm kind of hearing from you. And that is totally valid. But if we never ask those questions, if we never actually open that discussion, then it's all kind of, it's an unconscious process, right? So
yeah, absolutely, absolutely understand what you're saying. And I think, by me talking about monogamy, it's also because meeting a lot of bi men and speaking to them, what I've understood is that the reason why people don't even try in our community, don't even try to have relationships that are durable, is because they feel and they've been told that they can't by the world.
Mm-hmm.
That if you're bi, then you cannot choose. That stereotype that, oh, you're confused. Right. You want this today, you want that tomorrow, you want this today. And unfortunately, that has seeped into a lot of people's head in the community. And so some of them are just like, well, there's no point in me trying because, I can't. Or, other people, this is what they're going to spit back at me, and things like that. And that's the reason why I'm saying this. I am very aware, very conscious that, there's different relationship models that work for different people, and that goes across the different orientations, whether it's straight, whether it's gay, whether it's lesbian, whether it's trans, whether it's bi, the polyamory, monogamy, non-monogamy, right? They apply to all these different backgrounds and, orientations. But I talk from a monogamous standpoint because I was attacked.
Oh.
I was attacked coming out saying, well, you can't be monogamous. You haven't been monogamous. I mean, you don't know, number one, what goes on. But by all means, carry on with the assumption. And that's why I talk like this. That's why I explain that. And me talking like this is trying to say that actually, bisexuality is not a disease. It's not where you're just sitting there, wanting, just thinking about sex all the time. Hypersexualization has a lot to answer for. It does. It's the reason why we're plagued, why we're distrusted, why we're sidelined, why we're judged, criminalized, even. We're criminals, we're villains because of this hypersexualization. Yeah. And that's the reason why my message is about that. And, it has touched people in a specific way, and it's been very humbling to see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because even when I say, I've been married for, almost 10 years, for instance, and then people are like, oh, but, so has this been like a straight 10 years? Well, yeah. What else am I supposed? What else am I doing? But they have this assumption that because you've got a different orientation, then you can't be in a relationship that goes on that long.
I'm curious about the second part of your question that you asked, which is about erotic power. And I'm wondering what that looks like for you. I don't disagree. I mean, everything you're saying makes sense to me. I'm like, Yeah, that sounds about right. And it sucks. And I do feel for like, I think it's hard to be, if you're in a monogamous relationship, I think there's a lot of bi men in monogamous relationships who are just not going to come out because they don't want to deal with that level of
Yeah,
unkindness,
it's a lot.
right? Yeah, like they just, and many of them are genuinely content. Um, so
It's a lot. Like
yeah,
like I often say, it's because I'm a tough guy.
yeah,
But like honestly, when I think back to last year and everything, the scrutiny, everything that I had to deal with, coming out of a 6-month breakdown,
mhm,
like I'm surprised that I was still functioning and that I was still able to just fight my corner still. I'm surprised.
yeah,
But it's a lot.
yeah,
Like the rejection, the judgment, like it's a lot. And that's the price that you have to pay to be out. So no, I understand. I understand why other people are just like, well, actually, it's not.
yeah,
Let me protect my sanity. Absolutely, I get it. I'm not mad at people at all.
yeah,
But I feel like if I'm out and if I've earned this,
mhm,
then it's my mission to make sure that I am a voice and that I use everything that I've been through to communicate to others the experience from my lens, from my perspective, from my background, so that people like me can find solace, they can find solution in their situation.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the other thing about coming out. You know, for me, when I was like, the coming out narrative I was sold is like, there's, it's either a very tragic story that eventually turns celebratory, or it's immediately celebratory, right? Like, yay, we're gonna have a party and we're gonna celebrate. And I think really what often gets, or what I didn't see very or hear about very much, is like, oh no, first you need to go to 2 years of therapy. You have to confront your childhood trauma. You have to deal,
Yes, yes.
you have to deal with all of this, move through all this other stuff. And then you're going to come out, and some people are going to be really excited. It's like you're coming out over and over and over and over again. It gets very
Yes.
exhausting. And it's nerve wracking. And then oftentimes you're coming out multiple, it feels like you're coming out multiple times to the same person as they're still processing, right? And so
Yeah.
um I found really like the first year of coming out to really suck. I found it pretty shitty, frankly. And
Mm.
it's only until it's really, I mean, this is why I like the second half of this question. It's really the beneficial part, or the part that's felt really amazing, is more what's happened internally and in connecting with more community outside of myself, but
Mm.
in connecting with erotic power, right? And embracing erotic power. I think that's where I'm like, oh, okay, here's where the benefits of coming out start happening relatively quickly, at least for me. So,
So elaborate that for the people that don't understand
okay.
what.
Yeah. Okay. So, in terms of what erotic power is,
Yeah.
okay. So, um, all of this idea of erotic power, for me, I understand it coming from the poet Audre Lorde, who talks about eroticism and erotic power. Like, we have this deep innate power within us, that gets sidelined or gets repressed, and it's a creative power. It's the power of creation. It's She connects it with a very feminine kind of power, which obviously, as people who are acculturated as men, we would then not necessarily be able to access as much, um, in our culture, right? And so I feel like for me, erotic power is like the knowledge of the body. It's like the body coming alive, being awake. The senses are heightened. The experiences are more intense. It's yeah, and it can be very sexual, right? But it's not
Yes.
necessarily always sexual, right? So that's, or what is, maybe it's always sexual, but sexual is like this very broad
Yes, it is.
umbrella, right?
And I like when you said it doesn't have to be, because it can be sensual.
Yes, yeah, sensuality was huge. Yeah.
And that's my big thing. That's my thing. Sensuality is my thing, you know. And that's kind of what I focus on when we talk about erotic power. And I love the definition that you gave when it was just like, you know, the body becomes awake. And this happens to us as, you know, queer men or bi men or whatever, not because of our orientation. And I think it's important to say that it's not. It's because the process of coming out liberates us. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
The process of coming out, embracing our authenticity, frees us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it opens everything. And you know, it's not just erotic power, it's the creative power as well. You know, like creativity just explodes, you know. It's your ideas, it's your faculties, you know, you start thinking differently. You become a left brain thinker. Like it's all these things. It's not just to do with sex, although you know, sex does become very interesting too. I mean, okay, you know, you become more adventurous and things like that. But it's not because of the orientation, and that took me a while to unpick the two, because again, we get taught that it's bisexuality. Sexuality again. I removed that suffix. I don't know if I could call it a suffix. I removed that, and I just go with bi. Because being bi is not just about sexuality. Yeah, it's an orientation. And I even use it, I prefer the term orientation, not sexuality, orientation. But it's a whole mood, it's a whole vibe, it's a whole energy, it's a whole identity, you know? So that's kind of what that's my understanding of it. And how I've seen things just kind of, you know, just evolve in the way that.
Yeah, I think that naming that difference is important, or the difference between or just naming that erotic power is actually available to everyone. It's not just available to queer people or bi people, right, or bi men. Like, it is literally innate in every person, and something that I think we're all called to incorporate into our lives, right, and to be open to and aware of. And so I like that. I like that kind of like making sure that the sexual identity is not really the thing that's it's not erotic power is not happening just because we are bi. Like, erotic power is there in everyone, regardless of how they identify or their sexuality.
But we access it through our liberation. That's
right.
what it is. You
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And I think the more people in our community understand this, the more we'll stop equating LGBTQ plus with sex. Because there's a big, you know, emphasis on that. And I don't necessarily agree with that. There's an array of different identities, an array of different energies that all these orientations bring with them. But we haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to that, because the world is just like, well, it's about sex. No, it's not. And everybody feel free to disagree with me. That is fine. You can disagree until the cows come home. Because the way that I'm feeling is not sexual necessarily. It's not. It's there, of course, don't get me wrong, but it's energy. It's who I am. And that's what makes it so deep for me. That's why I feel it so deep.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's all about sex. It's not all about sex. I don't think sex is outside of it though. I'm like, I think sex is a part of it.
No, of course.
You know, I don't know. I think maybe that's my own sort of soapbox or something. Is I think, okay, so from another angle, I'm like, what's another way of destigmatizing being bi, right? Is well, if the issue is like, oh, ew, really, same-sex sex is icky and gross and disgusting and shouldn't be happening. I mean, if that's really an issue, if that's essentially the main issue or a main issue for a lot of people, I think kind of addressing sex and sexuality and being like, why is this such a taboo subject? Why is
Yeah.
this such this very human, normal, healthy thing, which is having sex, right? Like, why is this the sticking point on which we decide to literally, like, murder people and pathologize them,
Because
imprison them?
sex is sex is sex, you know? It's because people view it as like a form of intimacy. It's like what the for the world, for a lot of people, it's like the main form of intimacy.
Yeah.
It's it's come to the point it kind of determines who you are in your gender, in your gender roles, even like whatever, like the traditional views. And so in a lot of ways, that's why a lot of people are just kind of that's the focal point. And then the other part of this is that, well, sex sells. Sex sells. Sex is the most interesting thing, the thing that gets everybody's attention, isn't it? So it's very polarizing. So when we mention it, whilst talking about our identity, bisexual, I mean, listen, I've never heard of gay sexual or lesbian sexual or transsexual, yeah, transsexual as well. But with reason, why bisexual?
I mean, I embrace the shortened bi label. I think it kind of expands. I like that the bi, just the bi or the bi plus includes, I kind of see it as including the whole multisexual
fluidity,
because that's the other thing is like there's pansexual and omnisexual and all these other multisexual identities. And so it is curious as to why certain words get adopted and other words don't. I feel pretty attached to bi just because it connects us with a historical community of people who were politically active and I do think that sexual identity there is a political aspect to it, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation, because politics is our shared common life. It's how we operate, and it's hard to protect a group of people that you can't see because they're constantly being made invisible because they have an identity. So
that's right.
Yeah.
But so that's why it's important to have these conversations to be visible,
Right. Yeah, and I think all the variety needs to be made visible too, because I do think a lot of people assume, oh, you're bi, you just want threesomes. I very much see the value of what you're saying, and I think it's super important. It's scary. It's scary if you're in a marriage and you're like, I want to come out, and that's going to be the assumption, right? Like you just want to come out and have sex with other people, and some people do. I mean, that's the reality. Some people do, and then some people don't, and both are valid. It's all valid. But yeah, our culture, our media likes to attach to specific types of stories for specific types of people. So I appreciate what you're saying. We've taken a little bit different trajectories, but I really appreciate what you're saying about, like, I think it's super important that by, men who are in relationships already can really know that it is possible to be monogamous if that's what they desire to be and that's how they want to be, and to stay married and to maintain their families and their family units. Like, their sexual identity or their bi-ness doesn't necessarily have to upend all of that, although sometimes it will, right? Like sometimes it will, and so that's where I'm like, it's going to be a person-to-person situation.
That's it. but that's kind of what I'm saying. And I think again, it's about making those viewpoints visible,
Yeah.
because you never know who needed to hear that.
Right.
You know, there may be a man out there that's married, that's in a relationship, thinking, okay, this orientation, this sexual preference is overtaking me. I can't stay in this relationship anymore.
Right.
And then they hear this, and it will make a difference. And they'll be like, well, actually, there is hope. There's ways to deal with this. It's about education. How can you save people again if you're not making viewpoints visible?
Right.
How can they feel like they can be saved, or if they don't know where to find the correct help?
Yeah.
And I think out of all the communities in the LGBTQ plus, we're the ones, yes, less visible, but that's the least understood. We're the most misunderstood. There's not that many resources out there. I mean, they're starting to be, but historically there hasn't, because people like us haven't necessarily stepped forward, haven't always stepped forward to say, oh, here we are. But I love the fact that it's starting to happen. I mean, look, we're in the same age bracket. A lot of the guys that I've met are in the same age bracket. And I think it's absolutely fantastic that, we're having the courage to step forward and say, actually, we're here. And for us even to have this conversation today, both our first times, like that's, I mean, come on, you've got to start somewhere. And this is it, I'm in love with this process. I really am.
Yeah. Me too. And I do. I think, representation matters, right? So I hear what you're saying. I agree with you. I think also highlighting the reasons as to why a man who's married to a woman who's in a relationship who has kids, like, what are the benefits of coming out, that if he's planning on staying married and remaining in a monogamous, like maintaining the monogamous marriage, I'm like, it's valuable to understand that there are other positive aspects about coming out, right? And that doesn't necessarily need to be, that structure doesn't necessarily need to be
to explode.
Yeah, it doesn't need
explode. Sorry.
It doesn't need to explode. And there's all these other positive reasons as to why you would come out that aren't just, well, you get to have sex with the kind of person that you're not, or the kind of people that you're not currently able to have sex with, right? Which is what I think the major question that came to me is, it was like, well, why would you want to come out unless you're trying to
okay, right.
Like, that can be the only reason why you would want to come out right now, is because
well, actually, the truth about this is, actually, that's an invalid question, because people can do it without coming out.
Right. I know. I'm like, if I wanted to engage with...
Let's be hypothetical for a minute. Like, what would you put yourself in the aggro of coming out, and then just because you wanted to have sex with the person you want to, like, some people just do it anyways without having to come out. So, and that's a crazy question.
And that's been happening forever, right? I think that's the thing, is I'm like, okay, I mean, honestly, I feel like the bi men who come out in relationships because they're just trying to like be their full healthiest form of themselves. There's this irony where they receive all this mistrust and anxiety and fear around that. And I'm like, doesn't that show a higher level of integrity as a person, that they're willing to like name and claim who they are?
Exactly.
The many men, this is like all the people who don't, and just engage with whoever they want to anyway, right? Which, I'm like, that would be easier to do in a lot of circumstances. It's easier to just do what you want and just not talk about it. Anyway.
That was an interesting point. I'm sure we're going to get some interesting viewpoints about that. But just as a disclaimer, we're just talking. We're just kind of like, we're vibing and we're sharing different perspectives, you know. So every and I think it's important to also say that every perspective is valid, you know. Just because we're talking from our experiences, you know, it doesn't mean that what people are going through, whatever, doesn't count. We're giving our perspectives because that's what we're going through. And so
I think it's also important to note that like we're not a monolith, right? Like even you and I have differences in our journey and how we approach things, but I have respect for what you're saying and I see the value of the points that you're making, right? We're actually making different points and I'm like, it's good that we can make different points because there's actually a lot of different points that can be made when it comes to this subject in particular, right?
yes, we've definitely got different ways of expressing ourselves. Well, those that follow me will understand what I mean. Brother Basil is very, very organic, very healthy, good for the soul, you know, in his way. And I'm good for the soul in a different way. So yes, expression, but different, you know. So cool. I'm starting to throw that in now. Yeah. So the last point I wanted to talk about was about mental health because I just want to bring that in, and I think again, me bringing that in is not because we're talking about mental health of what being bi does to us, because again, being bi is not a mental disorder. Okay, just for the church.
Saying that. You should just keep repeating that.
Literally for the church crew out there, because I know, you know, they're going to come for me as well, and that's fine. You know, it's not a disorder. It's not why we seek therapy. That's not it. It's the fact that actually, let me just say this the way that I usually say it. It's quite, you know, it is the world that gives us the mental health issues. Yeah, it's not us. We're fine. It's the people around the world, in the world, that give us, the people around us, the people that stifle us and that encourage us to just kind of be suffocated. That's where the mental health issues come. The microaggressions, the discrimination, the judgment. That's what it is.
Yeah. The bullying, you know?
The bullying, yeah, that's it. That's it. So when we're talking about mental health, really, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is separate from anybody that's not good for you. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. You know, any relationship that doesn't serve you doesn't need, you know, doesn't need to carry on. You know, it's about, at this point, finding peace of mind. And I'm in that part of my journey myself, where, you know, it's about finding peace of mind, finding a safe space. I've been talking about this for quite a while, especially on the Open Door platform, the magazine, safe space. I cannot begin to express how important this has been for me to find that safe space.
Yeah.
Because in that safe space, I've been able to reconstruct my mental well-being. And it's been absolutely awesome. And I think, you know, it's been through meeting people like you, Dane, people like the other guys that I've met, the bi community that I've met, you know, by Black Men Plus, you know, as well, that platform that has been able to nourish me in ways that I don't think I could have found anywhere else. So for me, when we're talking about mental health or mental well-being as bi men, it's about community and it's about safe space.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Do you have any different, well, other, you know?
No, I'm just sort of, I'm listening to you. I'm just processing what you're saying and hearing you and just kind of like, yeah, it's really, I think it's so good to have this conversation and to also like be aware of how I feel almost like it's daunting. I'm glad we have 4 conversations to have, because I'm like, there's actually so much to talk about.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to fit it all into this 1 hour period, or to even
Absolutely not.
to even talk about our journeys in a comprehensive way, or who we are. But I think kind of like ending on this mental health piece of I do, that is the thing that when I encounter people either over the internet or in person who are struggling with coming out, with being who they are, right, in the public. I really do. That is something that I make sure to let them know that I honor and respect their choice, and I understand that it is a privilege to be able to come out. It is, and as a privileged person, I'm like, I see how that is something that I had available to me. It had consequences. I lost a lot of things in the process, financially, otherwise. And also, the mental health rewards, especially if you have support from a larger community and from preferably a licensed counselor or therapist.
Yes, of course. We're not discounting that.
I'm not discounting that.
Let the church say amen.
Yeah.
Let the church say amen. Yeah.
I'm like, life can be a lot richer, a lot better. You can feel more well. You can have more play, more freedom. I think that's what I love about your videos. Is just like, wow, this person is really just feeling themselves. They're just like having a really good time, just being in their own body, right? Which it's all very forbidden. It's all very forbidden. It's all very radical, I think. To show up as yourself, to feel yourself, to be in your erotic power, it's all very radical. And I think it also connects, and this is maybe a conversation for next time, but how this connects with other movements for liberation, right? We're all tied together. And so what I'm finding is like, wow, stepping into this identity, entering this political space, as we've talked about holding this identity, has actually like really opened my eyes in other ways to other movements for justice, right? For other liberative movements, and has allowed me to, in some ways, better understand how other folks who are experiencing other forms of oppression, right? Like what their life is like, or how they're handling that. Like it's like, oh, I actually, you know what it is it's helping me realize how much I don't know, right? I'm like, I don't understand that because I'm realizing how little people understand about this identity journey unless they're actually on it.
Yeah.
So it's humility.
And it's interesting, because for me, like, I didn't bring race into this conversation. But that's a whole other story. That's another conversation. I'd love for us to just kind of vibe on that one day. But it's a huge thing. And for me, it's been different to you because from what I understand, you've been able to have a community of people there straight away. Whereas for me, it was over the internet that I found a community. I don't have anybody here. Actually, that's a lie. I have one person that I work with. I'm not going to name her. She's awesome. She makes me feel safe. She's part of the community. She knows, and that's the one person that I have close to me here. But apart from that, everything has been, online and things like that. So that's how our experiences have been different. And that's why I get so excited when I meet other people, like, oh my gosh, we do exist, So it's a great thing. It is.
Yeah.
So Yes, so thank you so much for this time, for this conversation. Like I said, this is just part one because there's a lot of stuff that we've spoken about. You know, there's the politics. There's the we're going to talk about dive into more politics, sustainability, leadership. There's a lot of stuff that we've spoken about in our whole conversation before, and I'd love to bring that out to the people because it adds so much value. So if you have anything else to add, where can we find you? Obviously, I will tag everything under.
Yeah, so you can find me at my public poetry and art account. It's called @BrotherBasil, and I'm really looking forward to future conversations and more things that we can talk about. And yeah, this has been really great. Thank you so much for having me.
How's the nerves?
I think they've sort of relaxed, like,
oh, good.
yeah.
I should hope.
I think once we get into it and I'm like remembering like this is a conversation that we're having, it's I think people will be able to contextualize a little bit about like we're actually offering up our own limitations in terms of what we're the limitations of our time and of how broad this is, and like that there's a lot of different perspectives that could be offered. So I feel good about that. Do you want me to pause the recording? Yeah. Or do you
I'll just so lastly, so for those who want to find me, it's at Open Door Men's Mag, or if you're more of an up closer person. or like more of a personal journey, it'll be at His My Identity. It's a closed account, so I will check before I allow you in. So yeah, so thank you so much, guys, and see you for the next conversation.
Awesome.